for the resume, but for the opportunity to, one, reach out to women, because I found that a lot of women of color here in Austin are trying to career transition, and they're the ones who are like least likely to either have the kind of money and time to go full-time to a boot camp, or B, have somebody in their family or someone that they're close to that can help them make that transition. And so I really have enjoyed being able to provide the types of events and resources. And in Austin tends to be a lot of women of color in that group who are trying to better their lives of their families by transitioning to a career in technology.
Welcome to the Money and Flow podcast, where avocado toast and stocks meet. Did you know that women and women of color don't talk that much about money? And did you also know that the health and wellness community is a $600 billion business? And did you also know that women aren't in the forefront when it comes to decision making with our health and wealth? We're here to change that. This is the first podcast that focuses on wellness and money. This podcast is targeted for women and women of color, specifically in their 20s and 30s. And without further ado, your host, Eugenie George. Hey. This is Eugenie. Welcome to the Money and Flow podcast, where we talk about cash and vinyasa flows at the same time. Super excited that you're here. Today we have a special guest, Sara Inés, and I had the privilege of meeting with her a couple of months ago at a conference called North Star, where they talk and help Black and Brown founders start tech, start a business. And I was just blown away about her story behind transitioning into a new career. For some of us, we are in jobs or careers that we're not really fulfilled in, and so we're thinking about jumping and branching out and kind of what that looks like. So Sarah is one of the people that I love and trust, and I ironically met her 3 years ago when I was living in Austin, and she had no clue, but had the privilege of meeting her a couple of years ago. So it was great actually catching up with her and seeing what she's doing now. I would just want to preface that if you're in the process of thinking about changing your career and doing something different, this is definitely the podcast for you, because you are not alone. We want to make sure that your voice is being heard, and then particularly if you are a woman of color, talking and also listening about other people that are that have done what you want to achieve is also very helpful. So I'm not going to talk that long, but without further ado, here's Sara Inés. Hey Sara, I'm so happy that we're together, and I'm happy that you're here.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out.
So we've been talking a lot in the podcast about career transitionings. So can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you got involved into the tech space, and specifically the tech space?
Sure. So I started out of college as a journalist. I actually worked in newspaper when newspaper was a thing. I wrote for several newspapers in Texas, and that was, I really enjoyed the work, and I was pretty good at it. But unfortunately, I got caught up, as many other journalists, in the financial crisis, and so I got let go in 2009, and kind of through necessity, but also through, I think, serendipity, I became a tech blogger. So I was still working as a journalist, but exclusively for web. And that really opened my eyes up to different opportunities for somebody with my skill set. And so I started doing digital media. I worked at a YouTube network. I worked at a media startup focused on Latinos. And so I was able to parlay my journalism skills into digital content. And then ultimately realized that through that work with digital media, that the real win for someone with my skill set wasn't necessarily just doing content, but building the platforms for content. That's when I really wanted to go and learn how to build software. And now that I've been doing it for a few years, I can really understand the value of not only having those, quote unquote technical skills, but being able to pair those technical skills with like a really good set of communication skills is, I think, something that really distinguishes me in this particular field. So,
Yeah, I think that's excellent. So, why do you think that women and women of color should build platforms from the ground up?
so my family's from Mexico, and I think when I was growing up, my whole perception of what professional life would be like was very uh, was very, I guess you would say, typical or very corporate, whatever, was like doctor, lawyer, teacher, these kind of more quote unquote traditional professions. Nobody in my family worked in technology. There are some entrepreneurs, but their entrepreneurism is more, again, traditional, quote unquote, in terms of like remodeling or construction, things like that. So I didn't really know that you could uh, do anything outside of building your own business that would be all about you. And what I find really empowering when as a woman, especially a woman who comes from a more like patriarchal culture, but especially as a woman of color in this like very white male dominated industry that is technology, what I think is so cool about being able to build your own things is that you don't need anyone's permission, you don't need anyone's support, and ultimately you're in charge. And there's not really a lot of domains, at least in my experience, where out of the gate as a woman of color, you get to be in charge. So that's what I think, to your point, is really awesome about technology for women of color in particular.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, currently I'm in the a different sector where I'm in finance, which is actually,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a very small number of women of color as well. And I think
Sure.
when it comes to money, when it comes to tech, when it comes to things that are for the future or to help to build
Mm-hmm.
our legacy, I think it is really, really important to build, because at the end of the day, you're building for a community much bigger than you. Um, so I think that's awesome.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, this is really random, but I had attended one of your Women Who Code uh, like events when I lived in Austin almost 3 years ago.
That
So
is so crazy. Which one was it?
I couldn't even tell. I think it was like a actual hackathon. I don't know what I was doing there. I was trying to do a lot of different things. When I first got to Austin, I was like, I'm going to try everything that I could, which is great
That's
because,
awesome. Well, I'm glad
yeah,
you came.
yeah, yeah. And can you talk about that? Because I think uh, you you guys creating a community behind your coding, behind your sector, your industry. How do you think creating a community helped you progress in your career?
That's a really good question, and thanks for highlighting that. That's something, building that community has actually been really powerful for me. But especially as I mentioned earlier, because we're in this industry that's very, white male, and for somebody who didn't necessarily grow up or operate in those spaces for most of my career, I found it very jarring. So what I will say is, when I started in technology, I went through a boot camp called Sabio, based in Los Angeles, and their whole idea was to create kind of a more supportive environment for women of, people of color and women, in which to learn and grow in the tech sector. And so I feel like since I did start learning in that environment where it was more of a collaborative and a community oriented, infrastructure or teaching methodology, I came back to Austin and I was looking for that, and it was really hard to find. And so um, I started going to all the meetups I could. I was literally sitting at my house talking to my cat, and I was like, Sara, you need to go outside and talk to other humans. Like, a job's not just going to magically come to you while you're sitting
Yeah.
here mumbling to yourself. So I forced myself, to go to all of these meetups and try to meet people. And I went to Women Who Code lightning talks, Women Who Code Austin's lightning talks, and I found what I was looking for, which was just, a place where women could come and share their ideas and talk about stuff without being ridiculed for not being experts, without, um, snide remarks about, you don't know that, or, kind of any sort of harassment that I had encountered in other, tech circles. And so I thought it was so awesome, and I felt so welcome that I wanted to start volunteering. And so I think I ended up working for a couple of years as director of Women Who Code Austin here. I'm currently on the Women Who Code advisory board, and I'm also involved with the Anita Borg chapter here in Austin, which really is not so much, for the resume, but for the opportunity to, one, reach out to women, because I found that a lot of women of color here in Austin are trying to career transition, and they're the ones who are like least likely to either have the kind of money and time to go full time to a boot camp, or B, have somebody in their family or someone that they're close to that can help them make that transition. And so I really have enjoyed being able to provide the types of events and resources specifically to that community, to women. And in Austin tends to be a lot of women of color in that group who are trying to better their lives of their families by transitioning to a career in technology. And so what I found for myself is, in building this community, we've built like a Slack channel where people can go to, give each other internal referrals. If people have questions with code, they help each other out, again, in a supportive environment that is conducive to learning and is respectful, and also just ask questions, everything from what is how should I negotiate my salary, to, I'm transitioning, what should I wear to a job interview for an engineer, things like that, which, are super duper important, but if you don't have anyone to ask, can really kind of put you in an awkward position.
So can you talk a little bit about your transferable skills and how that helped you adapt a new career?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks for asking about that, because I think oftentimes when I meet with women who are transitioning, they think that everything that they've done up to that point is not going to feed into the work that they will continue to do. And I found that that's simply not the case, not only for myself, but also for other people. And so I've worked with people who did, worked in the service industry, who worked in, retail, who worked in accounting, who worked in like creative pursuits, and each one of them brought a skill set to software development that I thought was essential to their growth as software developers as well. So speaking in my case in particular, as a journalist, I got really good at asking questions and structuring questions, which ended up helping me figure out how to do things, or what I needed to do to learn things a lot more quickly. Also learning how to talk to people, networking. I've actually been pretty resourceful in terms of meeting people, asking people for help, being able to connect people with job opportunities and things like that. Being able to write well. It sounds silly, but a lot. It's actually, I was literally just having this joke with someone last week, which is that you get an error in your code because you misspelled something.
Right.
So
Yes.
that's totally okay. And then finally, I think something that's actually worked really, really well for me, especially now that I'm leading a team, is that I'm excellent at taking notes and documenting my processes, and such to the point that I've been able to create documentation in our app that helps people onboard and start development more quickly, because there's good explanations of how things work and what's happening in the app. So I think everybody's case is different, but ultimately you are going to have some of those transferable skill sets. And then I didn't even mention being able to communicate what you're doing in technical stuff, and communicating that to someone who may work in marketing, or who might be on the, business side of things. Like, they also need to understand the technology, just not at the granular level that you do. And not everyone is able to communicate those things, right? So you're going to have skills that are maybe not on the face of things transferable, but they're absolutely essential to being a successful technology professional.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely understand, and I think it's really essential for women, particularly, to write out a mind map. I mean, that is something I do probably quarterly, where I take inventory of what are the skills that I've learned. And most women can do that, where they could kind of do a reflection of what have I learned? Well, have I learned how to email, do auto response email? Yes, so I can write that down. Understanding and knowing how you can use your skills, your transferable skills, to help companies is the first step of understanding what you're worth and how you can help yourself build more wealth. Just build more wealth. Yeah.
That's
Great. So
awesome. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
so cool.
yeah. Because you never know. The truth is like you have to constantly. I'm like very type A, go, go, go all the time. And I know a huge chunk of the listeners are. So when you're thinking about like, okay, what am I actually good at? Just calendaring it. Okay, let's actually write this out. What have I accomplished in the past, like month, year, what have you? And so the thing is most women that I know. I mean, I met you at the North Star conference. Like literally every person that was there have all these like accomplishments. So just taking that time out, writing it is so critical. And if you don't do it, no one else is. Like that's the real thing. It's like if you're not your own cheerleader, no one else is,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. That's really good advice, I think, especially for someone who's switching careers. Is I tell people that too. It's like you have to believe that you can do this, because trust me, there's plenty of folks out there who are not going to believe that you can. So
Yeah. And then sometimes your worst enemy too is yourself, because you forget all the stuff that you've done, you know. Which brings me to your blog. So, I mean, I've said this before, and I just wrote an article about this recently of how your personal brand or who you are is online really can help bring an audience to who you are. Like I've gotten writing jobs and I'm not a writer just because just typing and writing and kind of just saying my feelings. I love your blog and I love your Medium blog posts as well. Like, can you walk us through
thank you.
your personal brand? Because it's like very lively, it's fun. It's like you work in tech. You're doing a lot of things to help women and help more diverse backgrounds. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So I think as a journalist, I think it was really hard for a few years when I transitioned to not write about things that I was encountering, in my professional life. So I worked freelance for a while, especially covering the 2012 election, and then I kind of segued out. But I think the idea of having a brand really became something that I became aware of probably in like 2009, 2010, because I was still working as a journalist and Twitter had become a thing. And Twitter is really all about who are you? What is your personal brand? Why should I follow you in 140 characters? And so I think my brand has changed over time, but ultimately I think what I tell people is that you want you want to be personable without being personal, right? Because especially as a woman, there's creepers out there, and so you don't want just anybody to have access to you. But at the same time, you want to be interesting and personable enough for people to want to know more about what you say. And so I think what's really important there is to find, pieces of yourself that you don't mind sharing with the public. And I think in my case, those are things like, I am in real life actually kind of silly, and I actually am really into doing nail art and things like that. So, but at the same time, I spend most of my days in the matrix, really trying to figure out, working with some bleeding edge technologies that really don't have answers. And so, I think when you can be honest about different pieces of yourself, people will care about that. But I think the bigger issue is when you're creating your personal brand. I think the most important thing is consistency. And so I've seen people, they have like one handle on Twitter, one handle on Medium, another handle on Instagram. What I would recommend is make sure all your handles are the same or as similar as possible. And secondly, that your content is the same or as similar as possible on all of those things. Like if you want like I have friends who have like tens of thousands of Instagram followers and have like 500 Twitter followers.
Mm-hmm.
So if this is a platform that you're going to be using the most, don't make it private. You know, I think especially if you're in technology or if you're a writer, you can't really make your Twitter private in order to fully leverage that as a network. But, you know, if you're primarily a journalist or primarily in tech, you could probably have a private Instagram. So, because ultimately when you have everything branded the same, when people Google certain keywords, or Google you, they're going to find all your stuff, right? I mean, that's
Right.
really what you're trying to accomplish. And so, so that, I don't know if that answers your question about branding, but those are kind of some thoughts off the top of my head.
No, yeah, that's perfect. Like that makes a lot of sense. And even going back and doing like ORM, like online reputation management, I couldn't. First of all, when I heard that that was like a job that people had, I kind of fell out of my chair. It's like, what? People are
That's
researching,
true. It's interesting.
right? They're looking at your stuff so that, you won't have something come up all of a sudden on, on the news or something like that. Uh, like I know that there are multiple like, celebrities that have that. They have that nonstop. But yeah, there's an actual industry that helps you. But if you write and think about how you want to be portrayed, that's to me the most important thing. And then also when it comes to your personal brand, you're also putting out kind of your future self. You're telling the world, okay, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I want to do. Of course have some vulnerability from time to time, but kind of think like, what do I want to do next? How is that going to affect the future? And that's what I
Yeah,
loved about your blog or your Medium page, was like everything's about diversity in tech. How can you hire people? What does that mean?
sure.
So yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
no, that's a really good point. That's a really good point, I think. And I actually know people who have leveraged something that they're interested in. And so they start blogging about it
Hmm.
and they turn it into, um, a consultancy or something, right? Because especially if you're already interested in something that's not, something that's like cutting edge,
Hmm.
and you start writing about it, then you're kind of making yourself a de facto expert. And I think that's what's so important about things like branding and that kind of online presence that you can have, is where you can kind of craft your profession in a way that wasn't possible prior to these social platforms, right?
Right.
Um, with that kind of content. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of that, and of course, like the personal branding is great. I was thinking about you and I have actually both worked in male-dominated spaces. So
Uh
could you
huh.
talk could you talk to the audience a little bit about that, and like what it is? What are some of your strategies when it comes to, sometimes being the only woman of color, also being a strong voice in the room? Like how is that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this kind of goes back to your earlier point about having that community. So I think I neglected to mention that I definitely worked at places that were very draining, because let's just say the dominant culture wasn't very inclusive, of in those particular workplaces. And as a consequence, I found it really draining to just be there every day. And it kind of turns into this thing where you're doing all this mental calculus about, like, how do I engage with this person who is the holder of this information that I need to be successful at this job, so I can eventually get a better job and leave. Let me ask him about his vacation or his remodel or his weekend or whatever, laugh at his jokes and things like that. I mean, that was my experience. Um, and then, definitely worked in places where um, some of these things hit the fan, because there were misunderstandings that weren't easily resolved, or resolved in a way that that would have been good for everybody. And so having access to a community of people who was, not only sympathetic, but also understanding and also experienced with similar types of issues was fundamental, I think, to me for being able to not only navigate those places, but also, see the light at the end of the tunnel. And, Austin actually has a really, really, really small job market for new developers. It's hard to find that first job here. And so, what I tell people is, you don't have to love your first job, but you definitely have to take charge of your own professional development. Like if you're not getting enough, whatever, opportunity or exposure to a technology or practice, like you need to go out and get that for yourself,
right?
So that you can go and get a job for yourself. Because the thing to keep in mind is if you're working at one of these places is they are not invested in your professional development. Like, so you have to be invested in your professional development. And does that mean that, I think in my case, I was doing Angular and I realized that React was going to be more interesting and a better, hot commodity for me professionally. So I started looking into React, and then I got a job with React. So, that's something that my job would never have done for me. Right. So that's kind of what I would say is that, you're going to be in these places. I worked at one place where my first day on the job, the project lead told me, "We're so happy to have a girl on the team." And I mean, I was already over 30 at this point, so clearly that was a weird thing to say. And then
that
I guess
just happened to me literally like 7
yeah,
months ago. And
I'm like, wow, yeah.
I
And then
know
the
I'm
second thing he
laughing, but
said,
it's terrible.
it's awful. And the second thing he said to me was, I guess he Googled me and he saw that I had written about a lot of Latino issues and politics. He's like, what's with all the Latino stuff? So it's like my first day and I'm already having to explain myself as a woman, as a person of color to this guy I don't even know, So, so it's not that, those things, I think those things I'm not trying to minimize that those things are hard, and they're certainly harder for some people than they are for me. But I definitely hated having to deal with that. And I think it made me even more, in tune to the fact that like, I have to be the one to get me out of here because
Yes.
these guys aren't going to help me out. They're not here for me.
Right.
And so that's ultimately what I think is really important about networks. I think that's what's really important about, branding is it's not so much just that, like, I love being on Twitter. I love being on Medium. I love talking about myself. It's like, I love the idea that I should have a career that is fulfilling to me. And that I love the idea that I should be able to go to an office every day where I don't have to explain every aspect of myself to somebody who has no interest in understanding that. So, so when you're in these places, these white male dominated places, and you're screaming inside every day, definitely lean on those communities and definitely keep your eye on the prize. What is the light at the end of the tunnel for you and what steps are you taking to get there? Because especially if you're working at a place that has no interest in seeing you succeed, you got to be the guy to get you to that place. So
Yeah, definitely. Well, thank you. I mean, thank you so much for taking your time out and chatting with us. It was very beneficial. I do have two last questions for you, burning last questions.
sure. Mm-hmm.
One, like, what was one of the books that you've read that kind of gave you this aha moment of a career change or making that leap? Or was there any books or?
I don't think that I wasn't really a book so much. I think for me it was really just I had one of my former. We met in college, and he was my editor. My friend Eric. At one point he told me something that I still carry. Gave me some advice that I still really carry around with me, which was that I said, I don't understand this stuff. I don't Other people know more than me. I don't know that I can like write about this all the time as competently as you want me to. And he told me, you're the expert in this. This is what you do all day. You are de facto an expert because you're the one doing this all day, and other people don't have time to do it all day. And so, I think that for me was a moment where I realized, like, oh my gosh, like I really wasn't valuing my own expertise. And I think in technology, it's really easy, especially as a woman or a person of color, to be devalued by people because, if your dad was a computer scientist and you've been doing computer science since you're 5 years old, like, of course you're going to know more than me, but that doesn't take away from my expertise and my experience, and my opinions are also valuable. So that's what I would say is probably my aha moment.
Love it. Love it. And then is there any like podcast or television show that you're really digging right now?
Oh, I don't listen to podcasts. I work at a music startup, so I listen to a lot of music. So
Yes.
that's mostly what I listen to. If anybody wants to download music, I'm MUSX. I'm more than happy to give you an invite code. Tweet me. But as far as TV shows, I like the really boring procedurals where they solve everything in 43 minutes, because I know in the real world it's never that neat and cozy, unfortunately. But yeah, no, I've been reading a lot of books. Right now I'm reading Hidden Figures, which is literally making me cry like every other page, because I'm just like so impressed by these women. So I highly recommend that book.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll make sure I put that on the show notes. That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for stopping by. And where can we find you on social media?
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I really do appreciate you taking the time. Social media, probably the easiest is Twitter, which is just Sara Chickadee, SARACHIACAD, Sara Chickadee, everywhere. So Twitter, YouTube, Instagram. So yeah.
Yeah, awesome. All right, thanks so much.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to the Money and Flow podcast. As always, you can catch us on the Instagram, which is Money and Flow Podcast. You can also find us on the Twitter at Money and Flow Pod. Or if you want to leave an email, you can email us at moneyandflowpodcast@gmail.com. Please subscribe. Tell your mom. Tell your dad. Tell anyone that's a millennial. At the end of the day, we do have to have more conversations when it comes to building wealth, because if we don't start the conversation, then it's never going to get started. You guys have a great, great afternoon, morning, weekend, whatever you're doing. Have a great one. Take care.